everybody, welcome, welcome. I have just a quick favor to ask of you as you're getting settled. If you want to open up this QR code, so just ask you a few questions so that I kind of know what you're coming into the room with today. And then in addition, go ahead and break out your laptop. We're going to code together today. We're going to think together today. So laptops are useful for that. And just go ahead and navigate to this link that's on the bottom. I'm sorry it's having you spell my last name, which is terrible, but hopefully it's not too bad. It'll take another minute or so just to get settled here. Kind of take the workshop survey if you haven't yet, and navigate to this link at the bottom here, which will have basically everything we will go through today, including the slides that you see here. So if you want to have the slides pulled up, they also live at this link, and I'll show you in a second how to get to that. All right. I see a lot of responses on the survey, so thank you. It looks like we're on the same page, which I love to see in the pre-survey. So it looks like you're here because you maybe want to start teaching coding to your students a little bit more. It looks like most of you are sort of on this entry-level side of the spectrum, but some of you have some coding experience. If you're someone who's coming into the room with coding experience, that's lovely. I'm going to maybe tap on you as a TA later once we get into the coding. So thank you in advance for that. And if you're coming in and you even have your own baggage about coding or what it means to learn how to code or to be a programmer or whatever, I hope that you left that at the door. You don't need that for that workshop. This workshop today, we're not going to need that. So what are we going to do today? This workshop is called Integrating Programming into Biology and Neuroscience Courses. I'm Ashley. I'm a teaching professor at UC San Diego. And I wanted to start by telling you about my coding journey, actually. So I was born in Philly. I went to college. I didn't take a coding class. I came out to UC San Diego for my PhD in neuroscience. Also didn't take a coding class. I was handed a bunch of MATLAB code and basically told, learn this, edit it, try to make it work for your research question. I went and did a postdoc at Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory and learned a little bit of Python and became what I would consider kind of more of an independent coder, like actually writing code from scratch. And then I, about 7 years ago, became a teaching professor at UCSD and decided I didn't want to teach my students MATLAB. It felt unethical. And so I'm now teaching Python, and it is really where I learned Python 7 years ago. So I've never taken a coding class. I'm sure almost all of you have also never taken a coding class. So you don't need to be a computer scientist to teach programming. That's like one lesson I hope that you'll come away from this workshop with while we're here together. So here's what I want you to be able to do by the end of this workshop. First and foremost, just identify ways that you could start integrating programming in some way or another into your class. Then we're going to dig in. We're going to access a cloud computing platform called Google Colab. You very likely have seen screenshots of this, even from like the session earlier. It's a really great platform, and I'll try to advocate for that as well. And then we're going to, along the way, be writing and editing code in computational notebooks. Does this sound good?
Yes.
Yes, great. Okay. I know it's the afternoon. I'm like not an afternoon person, so I'm like going to garner some energy, hopefully, from you as well. So here's our sort of general layout. We have almost 2 hours here together. I'm going to start just by motivating what we're going to do today, give a little bit of a framework for how we should teach coding. Then we'll get into the tools and think about that together. We'll go through one example. So this is an example in neuroscience. I know some of you in the room are neuroscientists, but not all. But this will just be sort of a window into what this might look like if you're teaching a programming lesson. And then at the end, we'll do some reflection, wrap up, and hopefully have a lot of time to discuss and talk about what you're thinking. So let's start here. So part one, why are we doing this? So obviously, we're at an open science conference. So a huge part of this is using open science. But also, it's the fact that biological data is getting bigger. So for me, thinking about neuroscience data, if we take a mouse brain and we assume that every single neuron in this mouse brain has 1,000 connections, well, that's a few hundred gigabytes of data. If we want to image all of those different connections, that's about 500 petabytes of data. If we want to record from them, that's another 500 petabytes of data. This is just, quite frankly, the kind of data that Excel can no longer handle. So we need programmatic tools to help us interface with these data. There's a lot of different kinds of data. You've seen some of it at this conference, right? And so we can think about things that might fall into bioinformatics, like protein or gene sequences. But we can also think about images, ecological data, microscopic data, and for me, in my world, physiological data, like recording from neurons over time. So as I mentioned, Excel is pretty limited. Excel can handle 1 million rows, about 16,000 columns. And you can automate things in Excel, but this is pretty limited. So code is infinitely customizable. It is both the frustrating thing and the powerful thing about using code. And I love this XKCD comment. Spreadsheet was so easy, but in the long run, you might regret it. So also in terms of reproducibility and sharing our analyses with other people, as I hope I'll demonstrate for you today, using computational notebooks, for example, is a great way to do that. So in addition to just data, there's also open source tools for biological analysis. And this is probably beyond what you'll do in your undergraduate classroom, but especially as students move on to PhDs and as researchers, they can start using tools that are built in Python and actually modify those tools for their own purposes. So this is a structural modeling program called PyMol. It has a GUI. You can use it without knowing any Python. But you could also go in behind the scenes and actually edit the code if you really wanted to. Like it doesn't work for your particular protein of interest very well. You can go in and tweak a few parameters and actually make it better for your purposes. So there are many, many reasons our students need to learn how to code. So I said wrangling large data sets, custom data acquisition as well. So in my world, we build a lot of behavioral boxes for rodents to run around in. Can't buy those at Target, right? So people have to program Arduinos in order to do that, and I did this as a postdoc. Our statistics, data analysis, and visualization, and then finally, of course, computational modeling of biological systems. Someone recently sent me this, which I really love. This GIF here, you know, students just sign up for classes they like animals, and turns out you actually have to know programming and statistics in order to get through it. So in summary, the next generation of biologists needs new skills to adapt to this changing landscape. So how do we start to do this for them? So the first thing I wanted to know when I started my job is I said, well, do students even want to learn how to code? Like, and are they taking coding classes, students in my classes? And I asked about 138 students, how much coding experience do you have? Most of them said none at all. And a lot of them said, I'm at least somewhat interested. And so I started seeing this early curiosity from students, even if it's a little bit tepid, right? A little bit of curiosity about what coding actually is. And we know that coding could be useful for these students, not only for their research, but also long-term. So in a study I did a few years ago, this is one part of the study where we have an open-ended question. It really simply says, what has prepared you for your current position? And the top thing that came out here, we look at the axes, is coding. And this was across a lot of different careers, but of course, heavily emphasized in data science careers and other kinds of industry careers. It's also a matter of equity, and I think that this is a really important point, which is that we're training our students not just to become scientists, but some of them are going to want to do other things when they leave. Those other things could be programming jobs, and they would not have access to that if they don't get any programming experience in their undergraduate careers. So there's a ton of data. There's a few reports reported here about not only the fact that more jobs require programming, but those jobs also pay more. And you can see in the data here that at least at UCSD, where I am, I'm much more likely to have female students in my classroom, and I'm much more likely to have URM students in my classroom than computer science and data science classes. So if we're missing those students, if they're not getting programming skills, this is actually a real problem for them, potentially long-term in the job market. So if we want to do this, we want to start integrating programming into our classes, how should we actually go about doing that? Well, there's a few things we have to think about, right? So we have to think about, do we have access to a coding environment? In a few minutes, you're going to see one of your own. I'm going to argue this is no longer a barrier because we're going to do it in about a minute. Right, so that's good. Of course, here we are, right? Many of you told me, I don't know how to code. I've never had to code in front of my students. So we have this barrier of trying to just get more instructors on board. It's also a little unclear what we should be teaching, right? An introductory computer science class serves a particular need, comes from a particular tradition within computer science. It's not necessarily the needs of biology students, so we have to think about what that should look like. And then finally, we have this issue of student perceptions of coding. Tell me, what do your students think about coding? Don't know, maybe? Yeah.
I always saw it as an undergrad a year ago of like, it just kind of felt like a black box, like it just like, you know, a computer scientist like puts all this data into a crystal orb and outputs like a beautiful figure. Like,
totally. Yeah, it's a big black box. Yeah.
I see that, and it's not an exact 50-50, but some people are intimidated by it, and some people embrace the challenge, and if they had unlimited time, could tinker with it until it works. But that may not be the case.
Yeah, totally. Which may be this balance of intimidation, but if you had plenty of time, you would know how to do it, is maybe how you feel in this room as you are right now, right? So yeah, our students come in with a variety of viewpoints. There's a ton of research on this in computer science. Here's a snippet of one paper, which is just what our stereotypes of computer scientists are. So they're singularly focused, they're asocial, they're competitive, and they're male, right? So it's Steve Jobs, it's, you know, all the tech bros that you know, it's this guy from Big Bang Theory, right? This is literally, and now we're doing our own research to show that this is literally really what students think, even in 2025, it is extremely this. And they say things to me like, I have buddies in computer science, they're all really stressed out. I've heard some awful things about computer science. Numbers stress me out, so they're actually conflating it with math, which is slightly different. Or I'm curious about it, but I don't know if I'll be a good coder or not. And I think that one's interesting because that tells me this student thinks that there's such a thing as someone who's a good coder, who's like born as a good coder, and then other people who like aren't, right? Like you're born into it or something. And that's really problematic. Another thing that's relevant for us here is the fact that, as I said, students actually conflate math and computer science. These are related skill sets, but they are not the same thing. And so here's one study where they show that these task values are highly correlated for math and computer science. And in biological contexts, students actually see math as more interesting and with less cost than computer science. So it might actually be worse for students than math, right? So this is a real barrier that we have to deal with here. So we still have to grapple with student perceptions of coding, but what I hope we're going to deal with today is, and be able to do, is actually by doing this in our classrooms, by integrating it into a biology context, we can start breaking some of these barriers down for students and at least give them one entry point into these skills. So here we are. What I want to do first then is I want to think about what programming then might look like in your course. So I told you why I think students should learn how to code. You teach in a very different context than I do, I'm sure. And so what we're going to do is we're going to think about what this actually might look like logistically speaking. So I'm going to sort of give you a framework, and then I'm going to give you a few minutes to think about what it is that you actually want students to be able to do by the end of your time with them. So this framework is going to start by having, on the left-hand side here, things that require less time, less instructor proficiency. And so on the end of the spectrum, we have just exposure to coding in coursework. So you're not even going to necessarily ask students to write their own code, but maybe they're going to see it, and they're going to importantly see the utility of it in biology research. If you were in the session earlier with Christian, his lesson is a great example of this. So he's showing students that you can actually build phylogenetic trees, for example, using coding. So that's one end of the spectrum. In the middle here, which is kind of where we're going to exist today, is maybe you're spending 1 to 2 hours doing some lessons where you're doing contextualized introductory programming. So students are starting to edit code. Maybe they're even starting to write their own code. These can exist in standalone modules, which you might embed in your course, meeting the learning objectives of that particular part of the course. And there's a lot of really good examples of this in literature, 2 here, 1 in ecology, and then some of my own work, which we'll see today in neuroscience. The other thing that you can do is you can start to actually build out notebooks that directly support your class. By show of hands, who teaches a lab class here? Okay, so many of you, great. So I teach a lab class at UCSD. It's a neurobiology lab, really hands-on. We spend a ton of time poking earthworms and recording fly behavior. And I have a set of notebooks that assist students through different stages of the analysis for these different labs. And it's actually not mandatory for them to use this. I tell them this is much easier than going into Excel, for example, and like wrangling some of these files in Excel. So I just make the case for it. I say, look, you can do whatever you want in Excel. I don't care. But I set up a notebook for you, and this notebook is going to take all your data, fit the exact curve that we want, and plot it for you. So your choice. And many students, for them, this is their first exposure to coding, just as a way of plotting the data that we're working with. The thing that you're going to see today is a little bit more of a notebook like this. So what we're going to do is we're going to work through a notebook that has some tasks for a data analysis pipeline. And the idea here is that this is going to expose coding to students with these straightforward tasks that I think they can complete within the time that we have. So at the other end of the spectrum, which we won't really talk about today, but I'll just throw out there, is you can actually build an entire class around programming in the context of your discipline. So there's some really good examples of this. You can build it like a cure. There's also some really good evidence that classes like this tend to invite in more female students. This is a study by some folks at Harvey Mudd. They've been teaching this computer science class that has a biology flavor. They've been doing this for more than 10 years. And over that period of time, they've simply asked who's in the classroom with us. And perhaps not surprisingly, given the demographics I showed you earlier, there are many, many more female students in their class. And they're also persisting into computer science at higher rates than the female students in the other classes. So that's really good data. I adapted this at UCSD and teach a class I'm happy to talk about. I call it Intro to Python for Biologists, but the concept is basically the same. We're going to teach CS1, computer science introduction, but in the context of biology and accomplish some of the same goals there. So here's a big picture of what I want us to build today. So we're going to start here. So this is a sort of backwards design light. We're going to start here with learning objectives. What do I want my students to be able to do? And eventually by the end of today, we're going to get down to these bottom boxes. So the activity that they're going to do and assessment and output and what that looks like. So what I want to do is I want to take a few minutes and start here. So what I'd like you to do is take a few minutes, open a word processor or a doc of some sort. I want to answer this question in the middle. So what do I want my students to be able to do with programming? And I think there's a couple inputs to this question, which I would think about too. Who are my students, right? Are they coming in? Do they know computer science at all? Maybe at your institution, they actually take CS1 mandatory, which is some places do. And another input to this question is, what's your course context? Like in what setting are you teaching this? So how will this help achieve my course level goals? So take a few minutes. If you want to chat with the people around you, you totally can. I'll ask a few folks to share out once you're done jotting down some notes for yourself.
Okay, wait. Well, in the doc, okay. Yes. But it's also in. It should be in. Sure. I really enjoyed it. I just sent the slide, and I think it should be.
Makes sense of the knowledge that
I think I guess so. Yeah.
undergrads together.
Yeah. No, that's
That's the kind everyone was trying to make us remember.
I bet.
Yeah, so this is basically our
Yeah, you should be able to and all that. I'm trying to make them
Nice.
like the whole thing.
Take about another minute to jot down your thoughts, and then I'll just ask you to share out a few things,
Yeah.
what you're thinking for your class.
in between.
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
And it feels like
Yeah, it's actually our capstone. Do whatever you want. Yeah, it's just like but I think the ratio is very similar.
Last quarter, I think, was-
Yeah. No, I love that.
I always
I hope nobody
All right. So go ahead and tell me, let's just hear from a few folks. What do you want to do with programming in your class? What are your learning objectives for your students? What do you want them to be able to do? Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
We want our students to be able to make figures for their lab reports and then also be able to apply that knowledge outside of the lab.
Okay, great. So make some figures, apply that knowledge outside of the class. So not only to be able to, generate figures based on the data you're collecting in lab, but take that, do it elsewhere, maybe in their own lab for their own research, something like that. Great. What else? Yeah.
Like to be able to simulate data to build intuition on what they see.
Okay, great. So to simulate data, like to teach statistics or to teach some sort of biological modeling, or both of those things. Good. So yeah, an amazing use of programming is the fact that you can use it to generate random data for simulations. You can run it again and again, things like that. So yeah, awesome. What else? Yeah.
Thinking about students who will never take another biology class again, a building of awareness, the types of questions that you can answer because you can code, because there is so much data, because we have to code things. They're not probably going to code, but I want them to just know, be aware of how important that is.
Totally, like some awareness of coding in the context of biology, because you would be so surprised how few students know that you need programming in biology, like much of the time. Not all the time, but much of the time, right? So yes, just some awareness of that, totally. I totally agree. Okay, so you have your sort of level you're feeling like this at. So let's talk about how we start to do this. Let's start about talk about the tools that we might use. So I mentioned not teaching MATLAB. For the record, it's fine. But I do think there's things we have to think about when we choose a programming language. So I really like this scale of conceptual entry cost against fiscal entry cost. The reason I hate MATLAB is because it requires a license, and not everybody has access to that. And there's some really good other options, so why use that? But on the bottom here, you can see a bunch of things that are free, like Python, R, or Julia. Also pretty low conceptual entry cost. The meaning of this is these things are written in English, so at least for folks who speak English, the entry cost for these is a bit lower, which is really nice. So you're going to see today there's words in English that just make sense to folks who understand English. So we can think about those. We can think about usage in your field. At this conference, you're seeing a lot of people talk about R, and R is also great. R tends to be a little more common in like folks that do statistics, for example. The packages are just better in R. At the end of the day, I don't think it super matters where you start. Python and R are really similar in a lot of different ways. Pretty easy to port between them, also with AI assistance too. So not a big deal. So I would say Python or R, really good. I'm going to show you how we can jump into a Python notebook, right? But also Lauren Buckner made a case for Shiny apps, a great use of R in this same kind of way of interactive sort of lesson plans. Okay. So there's a couple different ways to go about this. At UCSD, we have this whole data science platform. Maybe some of your institutions have this. It's formally called a Jupyter Hub. At UCSD, this is nice because students basically log in. They don't need to set up anything on their computers. But as I'm going to show you today, Google Colab works just as well. And honestly, sometimes I end up using Google Colab because our data hub goes down. So it's been really, really reliable for teaching. As we think about the way that we set this up, I think we have to think about whether we want students to actually write code de novo. In other words, are they writing it from scratch? Are they editing code? And this depends, again, on your learning objectives. The Carpentries model, which is another really great resource, especially if you want to get even deeper into how to teach coding. They actually run a teaching workshop to teach instructors. I went through it. It was really helpful, and it helped me feel like I actually knew what I was doing. They're great, but their model is really different than what I'm going to show you today. Their model is you open a blank page and you write code from scratch. But again, depends on your learning objectives. We can think about, do you want students to be dependent on their school or course-provided software? The nice thing about Google Colab is you don't need either of those things. You just need a Google account and an internet connection. And then we have to think about if students have laptops or iPads. So not every program runs well on an iPad. Google Colab does. So I have plenty of students in my classes, even my full programming class. They have a tablet and a keyboard, and that works great. And so there's no barrier there, which is wonderful. And then finally, everything I am going to show you is internet-based. So if you don't have a decent internet connection, then we have to talk different strategies. But these are just all things to consider as you're choosing for your context what might work. There are also people that feel pro or con against computational notebook environments. So like I said, accessible with the internet connection. As you're going to see, you can set up a template for students that they can essentially work within, and that's really nice. Also, scientists use them. Computer scientists don't really use them, but we do in biology and neuroscience and physics. So that's great. Although you have to tell students that it's real coding, otherwise they will tell you it's just fake. It's a whole separate thing. The con, one thing is there's no workspace for variables, so there's nothing that's going to show you where your variables are. If you're an RStudio user, you know there's this site which shows you all your variables, what kind they are, what values are in them. It doesn't exist natively in a notebook environment. It's a little harder to do nonlinear work, so everything we're going to walk through today is meant to be done top to bottom. But if you have something where you want students to like go back and edit things, do it again, that gets a little weird in a notebook environment. And then finally, as I just hinted at, students might perceive it as inauthentic. Like it almost seems like too nice. It's not like hacking into the terminal or something like what they think coding is going to look like. So that's maybe a con that we can tackle too. Okay, so our tools for today are Google Colab. These are at the back end. They work like Jupyter Notebooks. We're going to launch it from GitHub, but the other nice thing about these is you can actually store them in Google Drive. So if you have a Google Drive account, you can actually share a folder of these notebooks with your students, and they can launch it from there. So in the same way that you might share documents or whatever stored in a Google Drive, that's going to work really similarly for these as well. Okay, so we're getting down the points here. I'll pause. Does anybody have any questions or just like things that are burning on your mind at the moment? Okay, so with that, let's go ahead and get into it. So we're going to open up our first notebook. Hopefully you've already navigated to this website. And if you did, it should look like this. So this is GitHub. GitHub is a way to store computational tools. It also does what's called version control. So when I change things, I can keep really careful track, just like version control on Word or Google Docs, keep track of the changes I've made in my code. So it's a nice place to store it for that reason too. You're going to see a couple of things here. So there's a PDF of the workshop slides. These are the two notebooks we're going to work through today. There's a couple other sample notebooks that we don't have time for today, but you can poke around in case you're curious. But go ahead and scroll down for now to this button that says Open in Colab. go ahead and click that. So if you haven't logged into Google, it's going to prompt you to log into Google. And this is giving me some error, which I'm going to hope is not going to be deadly for us. Let's see if this works. Okay, so you should see this list of notebooks here. So this is just replicating what you saw in the GitHub repository. And go ahead and click on notebook 01, which is introduction.
If we got to sign into GitHub prompt.
You shouldn't need to sign into GitHub. It might tell you this notebook's not authorized by GitHub or something, in which case you can say authorize.
I just closed the authorize.
Yeah, great. So that should hopefully load up. Maybe try to refresh. I'm not sure why yours says no results. Okay.
Yeah.
Go back to this.
It's heated.
It's like half of the people are getting in.
Yes. I haven't.
All right. And this is the point when I need my TAs. So if you've used Colab before and you see someone with a hand up, please feel empowered to go help someone.
I didn't do it just for this, so I got the same thing.
So how do I
Yeah, this is my list. So hit authorize.
She's from North London.
You got it. That's so early. Oh no, I'm worried.
Here we go.
Yeah, I work.
I got myself out of it.
No, that's fine. I don't know why it's not. So we've got a lot of.
Oh, yeah, understood. Not taking the mix? Okay.
X out of it to try to get back.
She's like, all right, well, I'm going
Had this work without. Let me see if we can try something.
The ultimate problematic.
You know what's really sad is telling people a tool's really easy to use and then immediately having a bunch of problems with it. So give me a thumbs up if you're okay. Give me a thumbs up if you have a page open.
Are we able to log in?
Wow, that's
If you have something that looks like our introduction notebook, just give me a thumbs up.
I was already on.
Give me a thumbs up. Give me a thumbs down if you're not doing too great. Okay, people with thumbs up, keep your thumb up. If you have a thumbs down, I want you to find someone else in the room. We're going to do what's called pair programming. So go and find someone who has it open on their computer and is ready to go. Yeah, maybe everybody hold your thumbs up or down. If you're a thumbs down person, you're finding someone with a thumbs up that you can partner with for today.
Let's see if I create.
Thanks, Sarah. It's the only.
Okay, I think we're doing okay. Almost there. I've never seen this authorized thing happen before, so this is new. Okay, great.
Oh,
I will say there's one other option if folks are curious. Let me make sure this works before I promise anything.
it looks like you just
We refreshed and then authorized.
Oh, that stopped working. Okay, great.
We wanted to do.
Let me fix this.
You just have to register.
Yeah, you better register good.
Registered network for me, so.
Good idea. This is your intro to GitHub.
It's like total theater.
You got this. That's really sorry.
So now I have.
All right. If you're ready to code, you either have a partner or you have it on your screen. Just give me a little dance. Give me a little dance.
Oh, sorry, I get.
Any kind of dance.
Okay.
Limited. Okay. Okay. Something. Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and get started here. If you don't have it on your laptop, you are going to be the person who's navigating for today. So the way that pair programming works is someone is the person driving, the person who's typing. The other person is the navigator. They're the person giving instructions, telling you where to drive. So if you are in a pair for today and you're the person at the laptop, you are not making the decisions. You are just the hands of the operation. Okay. The other person, you're the one making the decisions. All right. So this is our Jupyter notebook or our collab environment that we have for today. We're going to do a few things, and this notebook is just to get us situated with how these notebook environments work and how we can start to integrate different things into them. So we're going to scroll down, and as you can see here, I've built this up with a bunch of text and explanatory text. Someone earlier described this as an interactive textbook. Yeah, that's essentially what it is. And you can put as much text in here as you want for your students, giving them links or images to things, whatever it is. This contains some background text on just what these notebooks are and the kinds of cells within them. So if we scroll down here, we're going to see our first code cell. So everything up until this point has been what we call a markdown cell. It's just a text cell. But down here, we have our first code cell. You'll notice it looks different. There's some interesting syntax happening within. And our first message here, our first lesson is that lines that have a hashtag in front of them aren't read by what's called the interpreter. It's the thing behind the scenes that's taking your text and reading it into Python language. So those aren't read. You can write whatever you want after those hashtags. But we are going to read this one statement that just says print. And it does what it says it does. It's going to print that statement back for us. So let's go ahead and run that cell. The way that we can run it is by clicking this little play button on the left-hand side. This one? Yep. The other thing you can do, and it's going to give you this message telling you not to trust me, but I'm going to tell you you can trust me. And that should run for us if Collab wants to cooperate for today. So we got one thing back from us. It just printed nice work. A simple cell. If you scroll down to part 2, so part 2 is going to help us edit these markdown cells. So if you're creating this for your students, you're probably going to write some text in here describing what's going on in the activity, whatever it might be. So the way that you can edit this is there's a cell here that's meant for you to edit. It says edit this markdown cell. If you double click on that, it's going to open this editor. And in Google Colab, this looks like a text editor you're very familiar with. There's some formatting stuff at the top here, but I've also given you some tips above for how to write things actually in Markdown syntax. So what I want you to do is this task here. So you're going to edit this, just write a quick biography of yourself. You're going to create your name as a big header, a short, quippy subtitle using a subheader, and then 3 bullet points that use bold and italic. And there's some hints above for how you can start building those headers in different kinds of format there. So take a few minutes and write a little cell about yourself.
Great.
And if you're the driver, you're just typing what the navigator's telling you to type.
Yep.
Okay. We can bold with asterisks. Okay. Yeah, we also can bold it, but that's maybe less than it needs to. Yeah. Font science creates headers of word content.
Sounds like first sense. Or no, first.
Did you get in? Oh, good. Oh, what that all was about.
Big header. You can bullet points.
Really dangerous.
Markdown.
Wouldn't it write about that? Oh, there you go.
Yeah, so this gives a little bit of information, and then this gives a whole bunch more.
So take another minute.
Oh, hold on. Yeah, so I had to go over here.
Oh yeah, you totally can. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, I need to print it out. Yeah.
I like that.
Oh, just dot star.
That's how she wrote this one.
All right.
Okay, so as you were doing this, we're all biologists, most of us, some sort in this room. I want you to be observers of your own experience and of your own mistakes. So tell me something you observed or a mistake you made, or just something you noticed as you were working on this markdown cell, like anything about the syntax or something that surprised you. Yeah, go ahead.
Not putting a space after the asterisk.
Great.
I knew that doesn't make a list.
Great. Okay, so we learned that if we don't put a space after the asterisk, then it doesn't make a list. So you can see here, and by the way, this is nice because it shows us what it's eventually going to resolve into, right? So once we actually run this cell, it's going to take all that formatting and make it pretty. But you're right. So if we didn't put a asterisk after one of these, it's going to do something funny. It's not going to make it a list. It's going to just have an asterisk and then our statement. Good. Yeah, Christian.
Well, on the same note, I noticed you don't need a space after the pound symbol.
You don't need a space after the pound symbol. That's actually surprising to me because I thought you did. Wow, I think you used to need to.
Yeah, it was an
right?
I think so.
Oh, well, there you go. Okay, so things change, even in Markdown. But you don't need a space there. Good. Anything else that you observed as you were working on this cell? Cool. Okay, so you have a cell. You've got some bold, maybe. You could have used the buttons at the top. That's great. You can add a link and things like that too. There's even a tool here to help you add an image if you need to. For now, what we're going to do is we're just going to save this cell, basically. So we're going to run it. The way that you can do that is by hitting Shift-Enter. Or at the top, there should be a little run thing, which I can't see on my view for some reason. But if you hit Shift-Enter at the same time, basically save your work as a cell there. Cool. So that's how we can edit Markdown cells. So let's go ahead and go to part 3. Let's actually start writing some code. So the first thing we're going to do is we're basically going to treat Python like it's a calculator. So we're going to write some arithmetic operations in Python. And here are the tools that we need. We need to know what the symbols in Python are in order to do these. So this table shows us all of them. So multiplication, division. There's this thing called a modulo, which if you don't know what it is, I'm going to invite you to try to figure it out in the cell below. So what I want you to do is in this cell below, just try each of these operations. So you can simply put in numbers here. So for example, if I wanted to add 6 plus 2, I can write 6 plus 2 and hit enter or shift enter, or run the cell using the little arrow, and it's going to evaluate that cell. So I'm going to just go in and play with those different operators that are above. Try adding, multiplying, figure out what the modulo is. Yes, Caitlin?
What order does modulo fall in PEMDAS?
Oh, great question. I don't know. But surely we could figure it out if we tried. I'm going to do that while everybody else is working. It's at the end.
That's where there's capital. And so I still got it. Are you trying to just like, okay, so if I want to do it has to be after the hash, like on a different line. Okay. Right now. And then okay, get it. Literally at 10. Okay. That's weird. And then be able to get all along. Run anyway.
It's like it should be able to keep as much as you.
I've got that loading. I mean, where you got Yeah. Yeah, I guess they're like a big, right? It only gives you the last. 200 modulo versus 2. I think it's
like for example.
Okay, so as you're working on this, same question as before.
Number was always
What do you notice? What's surprising? Jackie, I'm actually going to call on you because I just heard you say something that I think other people probably noticed.
It only does the last number equation that you put in.
Okay.
So I listed all of them, but it only gave me the answer to the bottom one.
Great. It only shows you the output of the last line in the cell. Okay. And this is another kind of weird thing about these notebook environments. It's very fine. We can work with it. But for example, I put 3 different operations here. It's only showing me the very last one, the 5. It actually ran those lines. It's just not showing them to me. And we'll come back to that in a minute. So that is one thing to observe. So it's only going to actually show you what is there. There's a statement above that we use in the very first cell that we could actually use to see the output of these operations. Does anybody remember from 5 minutes ago what that was? In the very first cell we ran. Yeah. Print. Good. So if we want to see things in our cells, we can wrap them in print statements. And that's one way of making this work visible that Python is doing for us. So again, it's running those lines. It's just not showing the output of that to us. Did anybody figure out where the modulo sits in PEMDAS? I think it's first, actually. Yeah, weirdly. I don't know. Yeah.
It's after multiplication.
Is it after multiplication?
Yeah.
Wait, but I did. Oh, you know, this is a side note. I'm going to go down a rabbit hole, which happens to me. Any other things that you observed or noticed as you were doing this? Yeah.
We found out that you can do like the E, like to the power of 10, both capital and lowercase.
Oh, the E works in capital and lowercase. Interesting. So you did like something like that. Okay, but then we can make it capital. Interesting. Okay, so in most cases, Python's going to care about capitalization. This seems a little loosey-goosey for Python, but that turns for this operation, it seems okay. Good. So always, and this is going to happen, students are going to ask you things you're going to say, I'm not quite sure. The next thing you can say is, let's try it, right? Let's actually look at it. And the thing I do in the very first and second day of class, especially in my programming class, is when students say, yeah, but does it do this? Like, what happens when I do this? What happens when I do this? And I just say, try it, right? We're here, we're experimenting, we're learning. So you can adopt that approach as well. Okay, but let's go ahead and get down to variables here. So variables are essential in programming. It is one of the main ways that we're going to move things around and store them for later. We can pack a ton of things, like a huge data set, into one single name that we're going to call back later. And so let's just play with those here. So your task here is you're going to create two variables. So you're going to call one A, one B. And then you're going to write an expression, one of the ones above, that combines A and B and assigns it to C. So your final note is going to look something like this. A something with B, for example. So you can multiply it. And at the end of the day, C should be equal to 6. And one important thing to note here, especially for folks that are coming from R, is our syntax for assigning variables looks like this. So we have the name of the variable on the left-hand side, and the thing that we're assigning to it, or really storing in it, is how I would think about it, is on the right-hand side of our expression, and we're using an equal sign to do that assignment. So take a moment, write out your 3 variables, A, B, and C.
Oh.
No, not necessarily.
I didn't print C, I didn't just. Yeah, I did that. Yeah, I didn't show you any of C. I guess if you just write C, it would. Yeah, that's, I did the.
Great, good to know.
I was, I
didn't know that.
Really great.
Looks like you can get that over. I mean, that's awesome. Okay.
The remaining.
or he mode.
Your class probably doesn't.
Oh, you can do any mode. I like what you have in all of them.
You're such a collab blazer.
I like collab if you don't.
So if you want to go to the calculator, you can just say.
In miscellaneous, there's multi-mode, tab mode, and kitty mode. There's only miscellaneous. And it's giving me away. I put all of
Okay. And things you observed as you were doing this, how'd it go?
Do this.
We did, it was awesome.
I made 42 penguins.
You made 42 penguins. That wasn't the assignment. Anything you observed as you were doing this? Yeah.
We figured out you could go into settings and turn on crab mode and have a little crab.
Oh, that was the assignment.
Okay, there's a ton of features. Colab is always changing. Christian actually told me there is indeed a variable inspector. So there's what we might call like showing the namespace or the workspace here. So here you can see I've created 3 variables. There's their names, and this is their type. They're integers. So great. We actually have that same thing in Colab. It's on the bottom left corner. It says variables if you want to take a look. I did not know about the crab either, so great. Anything else you noticed as you're working on this? Yeah, Ben?
Oh, there it is.
Yeah, it's down in the.
Cool. And Rachel?
Oh, just how to find, never mind.
Okay. So one thing you might have noticed is if you had just written as this final cell, you wrote it like this, it actually won't show you the output of it. Just another sort of weird quirk. So if we wrote it like this, where we're not actually explicitly asking to see the variable back, then it's not going to show it to us at the bottom of the cell. So we have to write either print C or just C to get that variable back to us. So just another weird quirk. But again, you saw the namespace. They're in there. It's just not showing it to us unless we ask for it. All right. So we're going to skip this task. Let's start generating some plots, actually, right? So someone mentioned data visualization earlier. Data visualization is like the most satisfying thing you can start doing with programming, right? Like you make a plot, it's really nice, especially for those of us that love data. So let's just start making some plots here. So in order to do things like plotting in Python, we have to start pulling in other packages in order to help us do this. So one thing about Python, it's free, but it doesn't come with a ton. So almost every time we open a coding notebook to either work with data or plot data, we have to pull in additional packages of code to help us do that. So that's the first thing we're going to do below. So the first package we're going to work with is called matplotlib, and there's a package in it called pyplot. So what we're going to do is we're going to import it, so you can follow along with me here. So we're going to type import matplotlib, and you will see Google Colab do this amazing thing, which is predict what I'm going to write. Because this is an extremely common operation in these notebooks. So yeah, you can either hit tab if you want to complete it, or if you want to type it out step by step, we can do that too.
You can disable that in settings.
Oh, that's good to know. Yeah, you can disable it. I mean, it's fine, and we'll come back to the using AI and AI assistance at the end. Depends on your learning objectives, but I'm going to leave it on for now, but good to know you can turn it off. Yeah. So this is our import statement. So this is us saying, pull in this other group of code, and then we're also nicknaming it. This is like a really long name here. We're going to nickname it PLT. So every time we use it after this first step, we're going to call it PLT, not the long name. So that's us nicknaming it. And then another step I like to add is this who's statement. And this is basically asking like, who's there, who's in the namespace. You could probably open the variable inspector, and that should maybe show you. Oh, this only shows you variables. So who's will also show you the module or the different packages that you can here. So who's is telling us which variables are there, as well as this module or package that we've imported, matplotlib. All right, so now we're going to start first with just some synthetic data. We're obviously going to come back to real data in a few moments, but let's just get a sense of how we might build a plot from scratch. So what we're going to do here is we're going to work with lists. There's a few different kinds of data structures in Python. List is one that's fairly simple. We're going to define it using this bracket notation, and every item in the list is going to be separated by a comma. So what you're going to do first in this task is we're going to create a random list of 10 numbers for us to plot. So you're going to replace the ... the ellipses here with your list of numbers. And again, we're going to use the same notation that you see above. So every single item in the list separated by a comma, and make it a list of 10 numbers here, totally of your choosing, your favorite 10 numbers.
Why'd you ask?
All right, and then make sure you run that cell. So make sure you run it, and you should see a little green check mark. You may have also noticed that the numbers on the side here are going to increment. Every time you run a cell, that number is going to increment. So that can actually help you know what cells will run in which order. So apparently for me, I've run 16 different cells, probably because I was rerunning. And then we can check that our list generated by adding random lists in the cell below here, which will give us the list back. And something that we also might want to do is make sure that this random list is indeed length 10. And so for that, we can use a built-in function called length, or len. So if I wrap length a round random list. That's a way of verifying that it's indeed 10 long here. All right, so if we scroll down to step 3, this is where we're going to get to plotting. So I've written the code out already for you. So we're using that PLT package. Here we're just using the plot function. And so this is the basic function that's going to allow us to create a line plot. And it's going to plot our random list of numbers. And then at the end here, we have this plt.show function. This is going to just ensure that the plot shows cleanly. You can take it away. You'll see it also just adds a line of text. So it's not a necessary thing, but it helps us just show it nice and clean in our notebook. So if you run this cell, you should see a line plot of your completely synthetic data. Since we're doing a lot of plotting when we're with open data, it helps too to kind of think about the creation of plots in these 3 different steps. So I like to think about it as first you're figuring out what it is that you're plotting, then you're modifying the plot, like you're adding axis labels, you're changing the markers or whatever it might be, and then you're showing it. So those are really the 3 steps. So if we wanted to add some labels, you can see I've added a note here. This is where you can add additional changes. So if we wanted to add an X label, for example, we're going to use that PLT function again. And if I type in X, you can see it's auto-completing for me X label, X-axis, Y label, Y-axis. So I'll be lazy for now and just hit tab a few times and run that for us. So here we have our first plot. Okay, so that's a line plot. Let's imagine we wanted to actually add some data and maybe even make this a scatter plot. So now we're going to look for a correlation between 2 variables. So this time around, we're going to pull in a different toolbox. It's going to allow us to actually generate random data. So someone mentioned modeling biological data, right? Maybe you want to do simulations for statistics or something. A big part of that often is generating some distribution of data. So this toolbox, NumPy, is really nice for this. So another package that we can pull in, we're going to import it as NP. So that's the nickname we're giving it. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take our random list that we've already created, and we're turning that into an array. An array is another kind of data structure in Python that's going to allow us to often like add things or do more numerical operations with it. And then what we're going to do here, as you can see in our task, so step 3, is we're going to create a second array that's all the values in random array times 2. But I don't want you to manually do this, right, to actually do that. What I want you to do is I want you to take this random array and use the same operator as we used above to multiply it by 2 to get a new array that is that same array where all of the individual values are twice as much. So take a moment and do that. So you're replacing these ellipses with your statement that's going to multiply random array times 2.
Or they're changing the course. Yeah, like just about here. It's not marker size. That's the only ones I know.
I was just
It might just be that.
Why is it different than one? This is us. Yeah. They were just on different sides.
That's just all we not having consistency.
All right, so hopefully you have something like this. We can take random array, use our asterisks as our multiplier, and multiply it by 2. And then I added a line 2 to just double check that it did multiply it as I had expected below. So all my values should be multiplied. And yeah, so now we have, or
Oh, they changed it.
let's see, check this, there we go.
Okay.
So now we have our two different arrays. So now we're going to create a scatter plot, right? And actually in this case, we know the relationship between our data. It's a perfect linear relationship. One is twice as much. So hopefully we know what to expect. What we're going to do here is we're going to generate our scatter plot. But what I'd like you to do is I want you to actually dig into the documentation yourself. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the scatter function. And the links here bring us to the documentation for these functions. So if you click on this, and it's going to extra prompt you here. So this is the matplotlib documentation. You can also look at documentation in Colab. I personally just like looking at it separately on the website. It's a little cleaner. But a few things to look out for here in the documentation. So as you know already, this is our package that we're using, and we've nicknamed that in our notebook as PLT. The function that we're using to plot our scatter plot is called scatter. And then we have this like long, overwhelming list of things after scatter. And it looks a little crazy, but I'm going to simplify it for you. Everything that doesn't have an equal sign after it, so in other words, just the x and just the y, those are the only things we need to give the function. So the only things we need to give the function, which sort of makes sense conceptually, right, are some x values and some y values. So that's the only thing we need to give it. Everything else is optional. These are what are called default arguments. So in other words, if you don't specify it, scatter is like, okay, cool. I'll use all of those as it says there. So you don't need to specify those things. You can, though, do things like add a marker, which is kind of fun. Like you can make it a bunch of hearts or whatever. But for now, really all we need is x and y. And we're going to give it in this notation where we're going to say x, comma, y, comma, where x and y are the variables that you're plotting. So those are random array and random array 2. So going back to the notebook, go ahead and take a moment and add your plot here. And Colab predicted it perfectly for me, probably did the same for you. So hopefully you have a scatter plot that looks something like this, right? So this is what I think is kind of like the minimum set of steps to go through before you're going to teach with Jupyter Notebooks at all. Have students generate plots, write some variables. Again, depends on your learning objectives, but I think something like this, which takes 30 minutes or so to go through with students, is probably the necessary prerequisite before throwing them into some data analysis or some other thing, in my opinion. And again, depends on the time that you have. Any questions on this notebook or the approach here or anything at the moment that's kind of burning? Awesome. So the question was, does it save? Okay, so if we want to save it, what you can do is you can use this button that says copy to drive, which will create a version of it. It'll just say copy, and it'll save it to your Google Drive. If you don't already have a folder, it creates a new folder that says Colab Notebooks, and they'll all live in there. You can move them around afterwards, but that's the default place where they save for you. Yeah, and again, you can save them to your drive, and then you can share those with students. There's also a share button on the top right. So if you have a single notebook that you want students to go through, you can just directly share that link with them, and then it'll open for them. Whatever you see here will open for them. You can co-edit these, but not at the same time. So if you're doing group projects, it's like not bad for it, but it is a little hard if multiple people are trying to edit the same document. It's not as good as Word docs in that way. Yeah.
That was actually my question was, I'm more used to Google Docs where suddenly I change it and everyone sees my change. changes.
Yeah.
This, once one person opens it, it's sort of their own copy, but it's not saved unless they save it.
Yeah, the last time I checked, you can have one person editing it and other people viewing the changes, but it's not quite as like synchronous as I'd like it to be. Yeah, it's not there yet.
Your original version isn't changed by anything.
Correct. Yeah, yeah. The one that you saw on GitHub is just there. It exists. Yeah, we've all basically just made different copies of it. Yeah.
But I just think students can create a shared document amongst themselves that one will edit, the other will see. So that they can all have one shared document, but they just can't do it together.
Yeah, they just can't do it at the same time. Yeah.
This was one that was sort of like read-only for us, but they can have ones that everybody can edit, not at the same time.
Okay.
Yeah. If you use this, it'll edit it. You can allow someone to edit it. So you can, use it as a shared document. It just doesn't work for synchronous editing.
Google, where you have the fancy turtle.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
One of the things I like about Google is when I mess something up, I can go back to the earlier version. If I mess something up here, can I go back to the earlier version?
Yeah, there is an undo, but maybe you mean like an earlier version.
I mean, when I'm writing, right? Like there's a little like thing timeline. You can go back to the version from yesterday.
Yeah, totally. So
if one of my group mates messed it up entirely, can I go recover one?
Yeah, so this does have a revision history. So if you open that up, you can see, and I think you can even go back to one of these. Yeah, you can open older revisions, so that's great. Once you get into this even deeper, you can use something like Git to have version control too. But I mean, honestly, this is probably what you're looking for, is just the version history in the same way that Docs has it. Yeah, great question. Yeah.
I think we kind of just like arbitrarily went with VS Code for when we taught classes.
Yeah.
What do you think are the advantages and disadvantages of either? Because I'm assuming it's kind of one of the two.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, and that's kind of a good segue too, because what I want us to do is you just saw one tool, and we all had, or some of us had some issues getting into it in the very beginning. So I do think we need to think about tooling, right? So this is one example. The question was VS Code, which is an integrated programming environment, a little bit more like RStudio if you're familiar with it. For me, the nice thing I like about this is no one has to download anything. So if I have a class of 200 students, I do not want to have to manage all of their VS Code versions. And then VS Code doesn't also have everything plugged into it by default either. So yeah, pros and cons. But for a full like neural data science class, yeah, I do kind of want them to use VS Code. Yeah, it really depends. Caitlin, you stood up.
The question was, what was the question? You answered it.
Oh, yeah, great. Okay, so what I want you to do is, go ahead.
So this is great to start, and it might give students the sort of courage to keep going with it. But then the stuff that you would need them to do as after division course or doing field research is a lot more than this. So how do you set that pace? Going from this first notebook to something where they want to be real data, and they can't just look at 10 points.
Yeah, good question. So the question was, how do you scale up from an intro notebook like this to something that's like a real activity? So we're going to attempt to make that jump here. So maybe you can see how that feels for you. And then we can talk about it. And again, I think it depends on who your students are, what you want them to learn, right? Because how much you actually push them to learn in terms of programming could be very little. So you could essentially write almost a whole notebook for them and then have them fill it out or sort of look at the data it generates, whatever it might be. Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it is very context dependent. Yeah. So just for the sake of time, I won't pause for this, but I do want you to think about what does make sense in terms of tooling for your needs. You all have access to Google Colab, and your students do too, but there are other things like more full programming environments. Your campus might have a computing cluster and things like that with services. So this is just something to think about in terms of how you implement these sorts of things in your class. But I do want to get into the cell types lesson, because I do think this is like the step up and actually a discipline-based coding lesson. We're here at the Allen. This is just one of many data sets that the Allen Institute has and shares online. Some of the other data sets that I work with in my classes our Neurodata Without Borders, which Ben is the resident expert on by far and can talk to you about that. And those data sets are hosted on the Dandy archive. So if you're teaching more advanced classes, I'm happy to chat about that too. But I think the Allen Institute resources are amazing for entry level, especially you know, let's say like intermediate sort of classes, or just depending on kind of what you want. There's a list in here too if you're teaching any sort of class that's a little bit more data science-y. I've been sort of curating this list of open data sets because there's a million different ones online. I'm constantly adding to this, so in case that's of interest to you, that's there. But the main thing, and of course, many of you are familiar with Cures, right? The main thing that I think is amazing about using these data is the fact that you can do real novel research. So in my neural data science class, students have found things that I think are kind of new, actually, in terms of you know, what we know about, for example, in this case, gene expression in the hippocampus in the brain. So the lesson plan that I'm going to briefly show you here has a few learning objectives. So this is a lesson plan I've done in my neurobiology lab class. So this is an upper division class. It's for juniors and seniors almost exclusively. We talk a lot about the fact that different cell types in the brain are really diverse. And this lesson really focuses on their electrophysiological diversity. So in terms of how they signal to other neurons. And one of the things that's nice about the cell types data set that I think a lot of students can latch onto is the fact that they have both human and mice data in it. So we can ask questions like, are mice a good model organism for understanding human disease, for example? Of course, one of my goals as an educator is just to help them start working with some of these computational tools, and also hopefully develop some self-efficacy in coding and neuroscience research so that even if this is just the first introduction, that they maybe pursue another opportunity after they see this in my class. So what we're going to do is we're going to dig into that notebook. So if you go back to CoLab, close this revision history. I think you can go, yeah, that should work. So if you go to File, Open, sorry, I whizzed past that. So if we go to File and then Open Notebook here, you should see the cell types notebook there, I think. If not, we might just have to go back. Yeah, let's do that. Oh, sorry, go to Open and then go to the GitHub tab here. That'll do it for us. So File, Open, and then the GitHub tab. You see that? And then go ahead and open the cell types notebook here. And it'll prompt you to save your changes if you want. You don't have to. Give me a thumbs up if you're looking at a page that looks like mine.
Oh. Well, I have.
Lisa, is that a thumb or a?
Oh.
Okay.
I thought it was raising hand.
Okay. So this activity is intended to actually follow a web-based activity. So if you're curious about doing this in your class, there's a link to the web-based activity here, which actually has students work through the Allen Institute website, which has this data. And I think that this is really nice because they see the website and the website's really great. And then one of the first things we're going to do is we're going to recapitulate actually what you see on the website, like further illustrating that it's code that actually generates stuff that's on the website. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take it a step further and do analyses that you can't do on the website that you can only do if you interact with the data programmatically. So to do this, we have to go through one additional step. So I'm going to scroll down to step 1 here. And so the Allen Institute, along with lots of other places that share data, have compiled what's called a software development kit. So the software development kit has tools for working with their data. It's essentially an interface to allow people like us to get in and do the kind of analyses that we want to do. Google Colab doesn't have this already installed. So what we have to do is we have to install it. So this is a step that takes a minute or so. So what you're going to do is you're going to run this cell that says pip install Allen SDK. It's going to once again make sure that you trust the content here. to show us like a lot of text as this is happening. And if you're to crunch for time with students, you could have them do this in advance even if you want. Or sometimes like I'll do this at the start of class. Like I'll have students hit run and then do the intro content for class and then come back and it'll have been installed. But this one's not too bad. It should only take about a minute. Now this really feels like real coding.
Like feels like R. Install package.
And open. We're back here again. There we go.
Maybe try to refresh or even go back to online.
Are you getting the same numpy error when you're at
Yeah, I got that too.
You're getting the same error. Oh, okay.
So you will eventually get this restart session note. We're expecting this. So anytime we install something, it wants us to restart it. So if you press restart, that's great. Once this comes up. If you're having some other mysterious error, though, go ahead and raise your. No, all good. Another system you can use, and this, especially if you're teaching like a bigger class, so let's say like 50 students, and you don't have that many TAs, and you don't want people to have to raise their hand to take their hands away from the computer. Something you can use is like a sticky note system where you have like a good, everything is fine sticky note and a bad, things are going poorly and I'm trying to troubleshoot sticky note. So like green and red, for example, and students can put them on their computer. So as soon as you see a red sticky note, then that tells you they need help, but it means that they don't have to like raise their hand and try to type at the same time. So it's kind of a nice system as well. But okay, so hopefully this all installed just fine. It looks like this long, intimidating message. We did our restart, so now we can scroll down past that step here. So you can see that we're importing the same plotting package as above, so our PLT. And then we're going to import an additional package. I like to think of these as like the trio of data science and Python. I have a GIF that I show students. It's like name a better trio, and it has the Kardashians, but then it has also like pandas, NumPy, and PLT. Anyway, so we're going to do PLT. We're going to import pandas for working with databases. And then we're also going to need NumPy just like we did in the last notebook. So let's add that here. So import NumPy as NP. And then once again, I'll add that who statement just to make sure we've got everybody in the room with us. So we've got our trio, and now we're going to actually import that module we just installed, and we're going to import the cell types module out of this. This is the kind of code I hardly explain to students because it's very specific to like how the Allen has set up their resources. But essentially what we're doing here is we're getting their tool, we're creating an object that has this defined structure that allows us to interact with it. And then we're printing a statement that says we've done those two things. So we can run this cell on the left-hand side here, and that tells us we're ready to go. So steps 2 through 4 here, I'm not going to run through with us. You can on your own. The idea is that these follow the web-based activity and rely on us having done that activity. So for today, just for time, we're going to step to step 5. There's actually a little outline button on the left-hand side here. If you click that, you'll see this gives us a table of contents, and so we can scroll down to step 5 here. So the Allen Institute, in this cell types data, they've recorded from many, many different cells in humans and mice, as I said, but also across different cell lines. And there's some essentially features that they've already measured for us that we're going to pull out, describing what the actual potentials of these cells look like. And so the first couple of things we're going to do here is we're going to get those eFIS features using their tool here, this Get eFIS Features tool. And then we're going to put this in a data frame. And a data frame in Pandas is very similar to an Excel spreadsheet. It's a set of rows and columns. You can label each of the rows. And you're actually going to see it show up as something that looks really similar to an Excel spreadsheet. I think this is a really nice thing for working with data. It's a very, very common tool for data scientists working in Python. And if we run this cell, you'll see that it's going to generate something that looks very friendly for us. So we have our data here. It has all the specimen IDs. These are different cells that are in the data. And then these are all the features they've measured of their different cells that are here. Things like how much the cell adapts or the interspike interval. And if you're not a neuroscience person, don't worry about it. But imagine this is any of your favorite data sets that you've just pulled into Python here. This little head argument that we're using, so where it says dataframe.head, is allowing us to look at the first 5 rows of the data frame. But as you can see in the printed statement here, there's actually more than 2,300 cells that are in this data. So it's actually a pretty big data set that we have. So there's a lot of data in here. You can even like scroll to the right. You'll see there's like lots of stuff, lots of numbers that are here. There's a glossary that I've generated here in case you're curious and want to know what these individual things are. But essentially, the takeaway for today is these are different measurements from the action potentials of these cells. So showing us that these cells might communicate differently to one another given their action potential shape. So what we're going to do if we scroll down is we're going to look at 2 of these features. So we're going to look at the trough of the action potential, so the after hyperpolarization. And we're going to look at the ratio between the upstroke, that first stage of the action potential, and the downstroke. And we're going to look at both of these after they've injected a long square current. So just one long injection of current into the cell. So what we need to do is we need to pull these out of the data frame. So we already imported the data frame. We called it data frame. And now what we need to do is grab these columns of interest, and we're going to assign those 2 variables so that we can easily work with them later. So the syntax for doing so is, as you see here, so data frame, and then we'll use brackets, and then we need to give it the name of our column. So whatever our column name here is going to be within the text here. So the 2 columns that we're going to look at, again, are this fast trough V long square and upstroke downstroke ratio long square. And we're going to assign those both to fast trough and then upstroke downstroke, almost as like a little bit of a shorthand. So let's go ahead and do that. It also usefully gives us a list of all the different possibilities here, so we'll choose that. So now we have our 2 variables saved as fast trough and then upstroke, downstroke. And now we're going to see how these 2 things are related. So for individual action potentials, is there a correlation between these features or not? So to do so, we'll use our scatter plot, which we are familiar with by now. So we'll do our plt.scatter. And yeah, pretty good here. So I'll put fast trough on the x-axis and upstroke, downstroke on the y-axis. And get something that looks like this. So yay, real data. Certainly something going on here in terms of like some clusters or some relationship. As it turns out, if we color these different dots by just one feature, we're going to color them by whether or not they have dendritic spines or not. So some cells in the brain are spiny. They have these dendritic spines that connect to other cells. Other cells are aspiny and they don't. As it turns out, and this will happen in the next cell here, if we actually color these cells, so we separate this data into spiny and aspiny neurons, we'll find that these clusters are at least partially explained by that. So these cells that are on the bottom here with these like deeper depth and lower upstroke downstroke ratios tend to be aspiny, and then these other neurons up here tend to be spiny. So how you tie this into a lesson plan about spines and what they do or different cell types is kind of up to you, but I think it's interesting to see this in the real data and to see actually that there's some messiness here in this particular example. So if we scroll down, I'm going to actually, just for the sake of time and because I want to give you a chance to kind of like digest and like chat, let me just talk through what this cell would do. So the other thing you could do is you can pull out real data. So if you run the cell as is, this is going to give us a sense for what these waveforms actually look like. So if you run the next two cells, it's going to go into the Allen Institute data and just pull out one of the sweeps or one of the trials where they recorded from this cell. And we're going to use our plot function again here to take a look at it. And so what I would have students do in the lesson is use the code here that I gave them to plot one cell and then go back and edit it to plot a different cell and basically compare the different shapes of the action potentials that they see. For this one, if we want to like zoom in, so we can do things like change the X limit here. So you can have students actually sort of explore the data in a little bit more detail, have them zoom in and out, and you can decide on how you want them to do that. And then the final piece of this, which is kind of the more like explore, test the hypothesis sort of piece of it, is step 7 here, where we get into actually comparing different cell types. So there's cell types in here from humans, mice, different kinds of transgenic animals. You can have students go in and actually dig out different cell types and compare them, for example, to test hypotheses about whether they're similar in humans or mice, and mice, for example. So just for the sake of time, I think I'll pause there. Thoughts or questions about cell types lesson or anything you're wondering at the moment? Yeah.
SDK thing that's specific to the Allen Institute. I know that previously when you install a package, there was a documentation for that. SDK also come with a package documentation.
Yeah, so the question was about the Allen SDK documentation. And yeah, it has a ton of documentation. So all of the different commands we looked at or used is all here. So yeah, for example, one of the ones we used above was get ephys data. So if I look for Allen SDK and then get ephys data, it'll bring me, yeah, this is the cell types module. So here's all the documentation for all of the different functions that are here. So get ephys data we used, get ephys features we used. Yeah, so that's all here, yeah. And I will say the Allen Institute team is pretty good about responding to queries. So they have this brain map forum where you can, if you make an account, you can ask like technical questions. So if you're going in and digging around their data sets and you're not sure what you're looking at or where to find something, they're pretty responsive on here in my experience. So that's a great place to go for answers too, yeah.
Student questions encouraged on the forum.
Yeah. Yeah.
May I ask kind of a more general question? I feel like how do you communicate to students just like when you're in class the usefulness of learning Python past just like showing them because I feel like learning calculus or learning math or whatever else, there's always the sentiment of like, how is this ever going to be useful to me?
Yeah.
And I feel like when it comes to computational neuroscience, it isn't exactly intuitive on how like writing before will let you do this. Eventually will let you do this really beautiful analysis. And so how do you kind of point students towards understanding the usefulness of this?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So the question was about how do you point students to the usefulness? I give a spiel to them similar to what I gave to you. However, in some of the research that we're starting to do, two things have really surprised me, and maybe this won't surprise the people who have been teaching longer than I have, which is, for one, for many students, just the ability to create something is cause enough to like keep them in the class. So, you know, many students, those in our biology major, are like, oh, every class is just content, 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 content. I get to do a lab occasionally, but in this class, I got to like create something. And I made a silly little quiz for people who come to San Diego to figure out like where they need to go see in town or whatever as their final project. So that was sort of surprising to me, like just the ability to create. And then the other thing is like, I think the sooner you can show immediate value, like generating plots and analyzing data, the better. This is one of the biggest reasons for contextualized coding to begin with, is that it can be immediately useful for students. And I've seen students actually take stuff in our class and apply it to other classes, which again, like reinforces they're like, oh, like this isn't just this weird professor who's obsessed with coding. Like actually I can do this with the data in the other classes. So yeah, make it immediate and actually like emphasizing the fact that they get to create stuff and try things and experiment essentially. And I think that's really powerful, yeah. So I have a few closing thoughts here. Just in terms of a general framework. So, you know, I tried to demonstrate for you today sort of my general approach for how I deal with this in the classroom, which is we do live coding. I try to encourage pair programming, and you can be more or less pushy about this, but depending on how you feel. One big thing is normalizing errors, normalizing searching for answers. It's really common, and I think, Christian, you said this earlier, like, you know, just Googling things is a part of programming, maybe less so with like AI assistance, but it's still a really, really big part of making errors and actually fixing them. It's huge. I spend a lot of time framing coding as a skill and talking to students about the fact that it's like learning a language. There's even some neuroscience data on this that I'll show students. That's like when you're coding, it's not like you're doing math. It's using the language parts of your brain and the math parts of your brain. Of course, encouraging growth mindsets around coding. So I showed you that students think of coding as like a thing that they can do or not, or that they're born to do or not. And so we need to like think about how we can actually encourage students to think of it as something they're growing into. There's a lot of evidence in the literature that people that have these kinds of growth mindsets towards computational skills specifically are going to perform better in those classes over time. These beliefs about whether these computational abilities are fixed or malleable impact their sense of belonging, how they respond to difficulties, and ultimately their achievement in computer science. So I think that is really powerful. But of course, there's a huge elephant in the room, right? Which is just like, what about AI assistance? I think it comes back to your learning objectives. Like, I probably sound like a broken record, but I mean, I think you can use it to learn as well. So don't undercut it as a tool for yourself. I program alongside it all the time. I think it's really, really helpful. And how you integrate it into your class really, really just depends. If you're looking for one, I think, very good guide on thinking about how to teach with LLMs, this Learn AI-Assisted Python Programming book written by one of my colleagues at UCSD is really great. It's $20 online, but you can also get like a week-long subscription and download a PDF for free and then never do anything else with your subscription. But yeah, that's a really, really great tool that has helped me think about how to do this as well. There's some extensions of what you've seen here. So I've taught with a lot of different data sets, and so if you're curious about like trying to teach something in particular, I would love to chat. There's other sample notebooks in the GitHub. Other people have taken the cell types lesson that I briefly showed you and built on it. I actually think that there's a poster later. I don't know if Yoon is in the room. Yeah, hey. So they have a poster later to talk about it, so you can ask them. Maybe your work, again, if you want to contribute here. Ben earlier talked about Neurodata Without Borders, and we have an ongoing building resource of tools to work with those data sets. We'd love to work with you on that too. But I want to just take a few minutes here, because we have 9 minutes left, and I want you to take a moment to now come back to these questions at the bottom right here. So briefly brainstorm, okay, what could your students actually do in class, right? So given your learning objectives, given what you're hoping they'll be able to do at the end of the day, what's the activity? What's the data? Maybe if you want to come back to this question of tools, you can. And then finally, I want you to think about assessment, right? Is it important even for students to show you something, or do you just want to show them code and maybe not even assess that? And that's up to you entirely. So what will show you that students can actually do what you want? And then finally, how is this going to fit into your own professional goals? And for any time that you spend developing these resources, how are you going to actually be able to support that for yourself and that output? So take a few minutes, and if you want to talk to the people around you, feel free. I'll ask you to share out in a few, and then we'll wrap up for good.
Brain cells.
Okay, so we're at time. I've been told something else is going over, so we can go a little bit over. So we have a few times for questions, but I did want to prompt you. I did want to prompt you, if you want to take a moment, I would love your feedback in general on this workshop, things that could be better. I'd also love to hear from you about what it is that you're thinking of doing. So there's a question here that's a little bit of a reflection question. What are you going to do from here with some of the ideas or just the moments of brainstorm about how to do this? Go ahead and pull up the workshop survey.
Available for getting a mess.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Let's see about that.
So I think this one.
Oh yeah, publish. Oh. Okay. Thank you. Should work now.
Oh.
Does it work now?
Yes.
Okay, great. At some point, Google changed that as an option. So yeah. But yeah, thank you for your attention and engagement. Yeah, I'm happy to talk, or if you have any questions or anything as well while we're here.